episode 51 of the Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero, and I'm back with another installment in my new Delisted sub-series, which started with Transformers Devastation. But this week, I'm coming back with one of my favorite genres, the racing genre, although this game would more be considered racing adjacent, criminally underrated, and totally flew under my radar when it actually was relevant for a short period of time. And unfortunately, now in its current state, I only get to experience part of it in a very gimped form, but what's there is still pretty cool. This week's focus is going to be Onrush from Codemasters, published by Deep Silver. Originally came out for the PS4 and Xbox One on June 5th, 2018 for only those two platforms. It was intended to come to Steam, but that was eventually canceled, and we'll get into the reasons why. This game had a lot of potential, but just never realized that. And especially considering the legacy of the talent who designed this game, it's sad that this game wasn't promoted a lot more heavily when it originally came out. And basically the reason why I missed out on it, if I had known that this was from the people who had made MotorStorm and Drive Club, aka the former Evolution Studios, which was shut down in March of 2016, was responsible for the brilliant World Rally Championship series on PS2, the MotorStorm series on PS3, and Drive Club. That team was shut down in 2016, regrouped as Codemasters Evo, and then joined Codemasters to bring us Onrush. And it was a nice idea that had some problems and unfortunately was doomed because of its overall design, similar to Drive Club, which I feel this game is the successor to in many respects. And this game has been described as Burnout meets MotorStorm, which I think is very correct, but again, I think represents what the former Evolution Studios, this was their second attempt at trying to do what Drive Club failed to do. We'll get more into that. So, this game is delisted, meaning you can no longer download it on either the Microsoft or the Sony storefronts. You can still buy some brand new physical copies of this in the wild. I noticed that you can still buy both platform versions on Amazon, although those copies are dwindling. And we'll get more into the current prices of the used game market and the history of that towards the end of this video. But I want to describe the game first to tell you as to whether this is still relevant, whether it's still worth its price tag, and if you are a fan of Evolution's previous work, if this is right for you. So let's describe the game in an overview as to what it was intended to be and what it still is. So in terms of the game's intentions, it was supposed to be an online, socially connected, team-based, racing-adjacent game where you get together with a bunch of people online, jump in and jump out, and do this very combat car-driven Overwatch meets MotorStorm type of gameplay. So that was the intention. It was supposed to be kind of like what Drive Club was supposed to be, a live service game. But thankfully, at least this contained a single-player component. That way, if one day, if the online features weren't there, at least there's something you can still jump into. So let's talk about what you can still do on this game, because obviously all the online functions were shut down. Anything connected to online multiplayer is completely gone. So let's talk about, if you did decide to buy this game in 2023, what you can still have access to. So number one, you're going to have a full-fledged campaign known as the Superstar mode, which will take you a good 15 to 20 hours to complete, because there are 6 different chapters with about 51 total racing events, ranging from single race events to tournaments. So overall, if you're looking for hours to justify your price tag, there's definitely a lot to pour into this. But I will tell you, it's very limited after a bit of time, because think about it. Let's just say you were going to play something like Overwatch, which is a big inspiration on this game, but you could only play Overwatch against bots and not human players. Well, you can see where the limitations are going to come in. You're going to get bored after a while, even though the challenge does ramp up from event to event. That said, you have these 6 different tickets with all these different events. You have 8 different classes to choose from, although technically 4, because there are 2 bikes, there are 2 buggies, 2 cars, and 2 trucks, each with their own specific features, advantages and disadvantages, and they all have their own specific rush features, which is an overdrive, which allows you to do different things like crushing your enemies, draining boost, helping teammates. That's one of the main fundamentals of this game experience. It's very chaotic. There's a lot going on screen, and I can see why this game would have been a lot of fun online, because it is not like your traditional racing game. It almost feels like if you took like Call of Duty or Overwatch and just put it in cars on a track, that's kind of what this game would feel like, which is going to be cool to some people and kind of crappy to others, because I said, this game is racing adjacent. Even though it has 4 different modes, none of those modes is a traditional race mode or a time trial mode. You have 4. You have the overdrive mode, where the whole point is whichever team uses enough boosts and reaches the target first, they'll win the race. That's the overdrive mode. Then you also have another mode known as lockdown, which is basically King of the Hill, where you see this zone driving in front of you, and you all compete to occupy the zone for the longest amount of time to capture it, and that's how you get points. There's a third mode called countdown, where literally the clock is counting down and you and your teammates have to race through gates to keep adding time to your specific clock so that your time doesn't run out before your opponents. That's that mode. And then finally, there's the switch mode, where you get 3 lives. You start as a small class like bikes, and then every time you crash or die, you then graduate to a bigger class, and then whoever's team runs out of switches loses the race. Those are the main modes that you have. You have the 8 different classes, and you have 12 different tracks throughout the campaign, and you mix and match. And you can see how over a 15 to 20 hour campaign, only having access to 12 tracks, 8 classes, is going to get a little old after a while, and you can only mix and match it so much. Really, the pull of the campaign is the fact that each of the events has its own specific challenges that you can complete to get medals, and you're going to need these medals to progress with the campaign, because those are going to be used to unlock more courses and more events. And then from time to time, you'll also be able to unlock customizables, like different skins for your vehicles, outfits for your specific rider, little tombstones that you can leave behind when you crash. But here represents the empty husk of what this game feels like compared to what it would have been, is because most of the customization options are locked either behind online progression or a paywall. That is the major chink in the armor of this game, is that even in the single player campaign, your rider progression is tied to being online. Whereas if you're not online, you can't level up, meaning that you cannot unlock anything. It's all just there taunting you, and you can't buy it, you can't unlock it, you can't do anything. If you were lucky enough to have played Onrush when it was online, you probably will still have access to a lot of these cosmetics, but for anyone like me who started late, forget it. And that sucks, because if you actually go back and play Drive Club today, it's totally different. Yes, a lot of stuff is inaccessible if you didn't download it before, but at least when you're going through the single player campaign on Drive Club, you can still level up, which means you can unlock more cars, and there's a whole reason to keep going, in addition to being able to post best times and better yourself. Whereas going back to Onrush, the most you can do with the campaign is get 100% of the medals, and that's great, and then complete all the challenges. But once you do that, there are no high scores, there's nothing else to keep you coming back. So after you've done that, is there any reason to keep playing Onrush if you decide to buy it? Kind of, sort of. There's also a custom mode where you can do a single match against the computer AI with different variables like weather, night and day, and funny enough, 4 more tracks that you would not play in the campaign. So that's kind of cool in being able to be playing those other 4 tracks. And then on top of that, there's a training mode where each of the 8 classes has its own specific challenge track, and you can actually do 3 different challenges and post new high scores for that. So ultimately, once you've done everything that is left on the disc and the updates that you're able to do offline, the training mode, unfortunately, is going to be the only thing that's going to keep you coming back to try to better yourself over and over and over. So from that standpoint, for the relatively low price, there is quite a bit of content that you can still play offline, albeit it does get a little repetitive playing against AI over time. So you be the judge of that. But I think ultimately your enjoyment of this game is going to come from the fact that it's novel, that it's never been done before, it hasn't been done since, and that if you are a hardcore fan of Evolution and want to own everything they've done, technically you should probably also own Onrush, because even though it's not a quote-unquote evolution game, it was done by most of the people who worked on MotorStorm, Drive Club, and WRC back in the day. So that's Onrush in a nutshell. I'd say definitely still has a lot of fun, something you can revisit, but the fact that you can't even play it against another human being anymore really hampers its long-term value. But now let's take a quick look at the price history and why each of the two versions is priced the way it is. So here we're taking a look at the price history between the PS4 and Xbox One versions of Onrush that are complete in box. The blue line represents the PlayStation and the gold represents the Xbox One. You'll see over the course of the last few years, they've been technically fairly similar in terms of value, because overall they're fairly similar experiences with some minor caveats. And you'll notice that the PS4 version has recently overtaken the Xbox One version by a few dollars. You'll notice the prices here that the PS4 version is going for about an average of about 13 to 14 US versus the Xbox One version going about 9 to 10 US. I'd say ultimately that has again to do with the fact that there are just way more PS4s and PS5s in the wild than Xbox Ones and Series X's. So overall the adoption rate is going to be a lot higher. But this is a bit of a misnomer too, because technically, if you want to play Onrush in its best form, you actually want to go to the Xbox One version of this, and you can go watch a comparison video on the Gaming Bolt site on YouTube, where even though the games have identical frame rates in performance mode, they both hit a 60 frames versus the 30 frames they're able to hit in resolution mode, whereas the Xbox One version in resolution mode is able to actually hit 4K textures, whereas the PS4 Pro can only go a little bit higher than 1080p. The other problem with the PlayStation version compared to the Xbox is that if you pop this into your PS5 hoping for a visual upgrade, it's not going to happen, because support for this game died a long time ago. This game was delisted for a number of factors. It was delisted in September of 2022, and then the servers were shuttered down in November forever. Now, a few factors play into this. Number one, it launched so poorly that it only sold, I think, 1,000 copies in the UK in its first week, was number 37 on the charts, which is a terrible launch. There was barely any marketing for it too, so I would say I wouldn't put all the blame on Codemasters Evo and the team there, but they were certainly a part of it in terms of the fact that I think their ambitions were a little too big for this game. But regardless, this game sold very poorly. Most of the team, including the director Paul Roshinsky, who was also the director on Drive Club and MotorStorm RC, they were let go just a month after this game was released. And overall, it just kind of sat there, just kind of being an online presence, but never really took off. And I would say that has a lot to do with the fact that there are some great ideas in this package, but overall, the fact that there's no actual traditional racing type or time trial type of event in this really hampers it. I'd say one of the main foundations of this game, which is the stampede mechanic, and essentially what that is that when you die or crash, the game spawns you right back into the action, so you're just into it. I'd say that's kind of cool from a multiplayer perspective, because it borrows a lot from Call of Duty and Overwatch in that sense, and those were inspirations, but it also kind of unbalances the game and rewards bad behavior to the point that you could be terrible at this game, but still make an impact and still possibly win the race just because you're being spawned back into the action all the time. That's one of the problems with the game, that there's definitely hit or misses in terms of the overall game design, but in terms of the overall long-term planning, because this was intended to be a live service game, I'd say number one, tying progression to being online was a terrible mistake, because there's nothing to do if you're not connected. And number two, kind of like Drive Club, I feel that Onrush didn't have enough direction and focus from the outset. It was just kind of a general thing. Like, we just want to make a socially connected racer and then see where it goes based on community feedback. And for me, when you're relying too much on the community to structure your game, it shows you that maybe your foundation wasn't strong enough to begin with. And when you read into some of the reasons behind the laying off of the Codemasters Evo staff, you'll also find out that there may have been communications problems between the team and Codemasters at large, which is surprising looking at the spotty history of Evolution in the past, and sometimes, especially in terms of Drive Club, how their ambitions often outpaced the technology and their own capabilities. So that's where Onrush is. This is the history. You can see overall, not too much of a change. It's not super expensive. So if you are a big hardcore Evolution fan and want to complete that oeuvre of work, or you just want to play something that's very unique and has never been done since, Onrush is definitely worth the price of admission. And if we take a look at eBay, for example, you'll see it's not super expensive. It's still out there. And if you are one of those people who likes to collect sealed copies of games, you can actually still go over to Amazon right now and buy a brand new copy of this, even though supplies are dwindling, for about 20 US on either of the platforms. So it's still out there. You be the judge of whether it justifies your purchase. But I would say, again, if you happen to own an Xbox Series X, it's a no-brainer. You probably want to go get that version so you can at least see what it would look like at 4K. And that about wraps it up for episode 51 of the Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.